After the end of the Second World War in 1945, there was, of course, huge problems in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly. People who had lost families, friends, lands, properties, etc., etc. And there was a huge amount of poverty. People began to look at how they could help some of these people in Germany, Poland, and other parts of Eastern Europe, particularly. And a lot of people set up, particularly those with landowners and that, decided maybe they could help by taking some of these people in. The Zahalic family came from Poland. When they arrived, again, I think it was late 1940s, and that was just a family of a man, his wife, and his son, George. Now, George was about the same age, roughly, as my eldest sister, Teresa. So they used to play sometimes together, and Margaret, my second sister. And he went to school here, etc. He was a lovely fella, George. And they stayed there for a good many years. And the Zahalics lived in the castle itself, and they helped out. After so many years, sometimes in the early 50s, they went on to live in America. George Zahalic joined the army in the USA, but he actually returned to the castle one time. It must have been late 60s, 70s maybe. He called and I met him, and we went for a little trip up to Holt. He had his wife at that time, he was married, and so he just visited around the place and he headed back to America. And I never heard from him since, but it was nice of him to call. And my mother, of course, was delighted to see him at the time she was alive. In the early 50s, the Toomels arrived. Now, that was a lady, RITA TIA, Agnes Toomel, and Rita's daughter, Tia. I think Rita's husband had been killed in the war, as far as I can recall. And so they came over from Estonia, and they lived in the castle, also lived within the castle. And again, they were made, I think, to Miss Talbot or whatever, and general duties there. And Tia went to school. I think she went to St. Andrew's Protestant School. Now, Tia was a nice, lovely little girl. So they stayed for a good many years. And then again, they went off to America. Then later on in the 50s, there was a lady, Anastasia, and her actual name was Anastasia Bierkowska. She was actually a Russian, and she was born in Derbent in Russia in 1900. So it was the late 50s, I think, or early 60s, she came to Malahide. The interesting thing about this lady was she was very poor at English, very, very poor, and never really picked up. She was sort of middle-aged when she came, and she wasn't at an age where she could really pick up languages easily. But she could speak Italian, and herself and Miss Talbot conversed all the time in Italian. And I remember she used to get these, or maybe Miss Talbot probably got them for her, these Italian weekly papers. They were produced once a week, and they always had very colourful pictures in the front. Even in those days, there's just the front of the paper would be colourful pictures. And at that time, she'd call into the house. She would walk down to the village, and she would buy a few things for herself, usually chocolate, because remember she was great one for eating chocolate. She might call into my mother, but she'd say a few words, and off she'd trot again. Friendly person, but at the same time, she hadn't great communication. So I think she was a lonely person, but because of that, I think herself and Miss Talbot bonded together because they could speak the language. But Miss Talbot looked after her very well, and they seemed to be good friends. And when the poor lady died, I think in 1966 she died, yeah. And Miss Talbot got a grave for her in the Malahide Cemetery, still there today. She was buried there, and a beautiful Celtic cross was put on the grave. And part of the inscription, which a lot of it is nearly gone now from the grave, just from wear and tear, but could be restored. And part of it says, Miss Talbot just said on it, a faithful friend, and gave her date of birth, where she was born, and the date she died, and just put on it, a faithful friend. It was a very nice thing I got to do. No, I often visited just to have a look. I don't know if anybody else ever remembers her, but I do. And I've promised myself I would clean up the gravestone, but I haven't, I haven't got around to it, but I certainly hope to do it this year.